This video is all about Bitwig Studios Polymer synthesizer, and we're going to break this up into three parts. First, just talking about what this instrument is, how it works. Second part, we'll be listening to presets. Third part, talking about the significance of this instrument and how useful this may be for you, depending on the type of producer / sound designer you are. For starters, as far as I know, this is the first instrument where you can break it out into the grid. So, I mean, you can even see here with the way these things are all broken up into little blocks that it would make sense that we could right click here and convert this thing into the poly grid, where then if you wanted to, you could go in here and you could mess around and do some custom stuff if you wanted to. We really haven't spent any time in the grid on this channel because, to be quite honest with you guys, having learned Reactor a long time ago, it's just such a pain for someone like me. I've never really had a lot of fun in these sort of environments. Now, there's plenty of people that will have fun. It's just not something for me. So whenever I see new updates and things happening in the grid, my first instinct is, ooh, I wonder if there's any cool presets that are incorporating this, not, ooh, I want to go in there and try to do something myself. I would love to be able to do that, but it is just not for me. So be aware that that is something that you can do. But if I undo, I can get back out and we can look at the Polymer here. At the end of the video, we'll talk about why that conversion into the poly grid is so significant, or at least why I think it could be significant. But with Bitwig Studio and their instruments, it's very important to understand that everything works from left to right. Our modulators exist over in the left, our sound source is here, our shaper is here, our output envelope is here, left to right, effects, left to right. Note effects probably should exist at the beginning of this, but I think for design, they put it up at the top. Note effects are also kind of happening at the beginning, and then you have your actual audio effects that's coming in. Okay, so let's get into it with this instrument. First things first, whenever you're working with a Bitwig instrument, you want to bring up the inspector because the inspector is going to give you your modulation matrix. And you can actually do things a little bit quicker sometimes from that modulation matrix on the inspector panel. So when we bring this up, we can see a variety of different things. And the part that's kind of overwhelming whenever you bring up an instrument is that you have all these expression controls right here. As this patch stands, there is only one source of modulation, and that is something is modulating the pitch, and it's called vibrato here. So we expect vibrato to be a cyclical pitch modulation. And we're not hearing anything with that, and that's because our mod wheel is not working. Once we start to turn the mod wheel, we can see that occurring, and we can go in here and we could further change the rules of the vibrato. All right, and if I want to, one obvious one is just go from mod wheel to manual. There's a little bit of a delay time on here, so when I click, delay, and then there comes the vibrato and like so. I'm actually going to get rid of those because I think for learning purposes, it might be easier to start with a clean slate. So now when I click on the Polymer and I get this device view, we can see that we have two sources of modulation in ADSR. That exists here. By default, this is always going to shape the volume or the output here. So if I want to turn this into, you know, more of like a long, sustainy kind of sound, I can do that with a long attack, a long decay. Let's bring our sustain down even lower. We can shape these envelopes further. And then a lengthy release. And you can hear that like so. There are some other options in here that we're actually not going to look at because I think they're all really straightforward. So we're going to stick to ADSR, which, believe it or not, of all those envelope options, this would be the hardest one to understand. And it's actually pretty easy. We're going to make a gate message for now. Okay. Here a little click, so we'll add a little bit of release, maybe add a tiny bit of attack. And there you go. So when I click the note, we hear sound. When I release, we do not hear any more sound like so. We also have our filter envelope, which I'm actually going to turn off. So right now it is actually working. So there is a modulation amount being set to the cutoff. If I just double click that there, that then gets cut off. I can also just turn off the filter altogether, and we're just going to hear the pulse wave coming through. It might be a little loud. So now we're only hearing our sound sources. We also have our voice stacking options here. Okay, so right now we have a maximum of 6 voices that can be played. If I bring this down to, let's say, 4, and I start playing notes, As I keep playing more and more notes, the maximum we can hear at any one time is 4. And that's what this like kind of stealing has to do with. So it's going to be stealing like the latest note or the first note that I've hit. You can hear that, but luckily with the way our computers are and the power of our CPUs, you can crank this typically all the way up unless you want to make a monophonic sound, which would just be one voice at a time. So the voices and the voice stacking options we have relate pretty directly to what we have in our global controls on the instrument. And this is true in all Bitwig instruments. These guys in red are kind of the global things. So we have a velocity sensitivity, and that's related specifically to volume. So right now, if I play a note quietly, or I should say if I tap a note very lightly, it's going to be played quieter than if I slam a note down on the keyboard. All right, let's just bring that back to 0 for now. We also have our panning. Really, this is only going to be relevant, I think, for most people when you are doing voice stacking and you're kind of changing where those voices exist on the stereo field, on the stereo plane. That can be something you can use for a little more variety, which I guess we'll do. It's not going to make that big of a difference, but we will hear it. And then we have our main output. This is more of your gain staging output. And then kind of new in here, I believe, is this high pass filter. So this can either be used to thin out your sound, or it can be used to kind of clear out some of the subsonics. So if we just bring that down to 30, that should be good. We have a global pitch control too, so like a tuning control if you want to put the instrument way out of tune. I could do that like so, as well as our gliding, okay? And this is standard on most instruments. So as I go from one note to another, we can hear that it's always gliding. If I turn on legato glide, this is typically only relevant, I shouldn't say always, but typically when you're doing a monophonic instrument, so just one voice playing at a time. But now if I play notes and there's a gap in between, we don't hear any glide. If they overlap, we can hear that the glide kicks in, more relevant when we're working with one voice. Okay, and I'm gonna go into true mode, which is a little more of an analog sound. I think it gives a little more of a hit on the CPU. And you can hear how that glide is only kicking in when I'm overlapping notes, but we're gonna go ahead and just turn that off as well. The other thing to mention, again, from this view is our voice stacking. So we can take it and start to add on more voices, which is just gonna be a replication of that same sound. So for now, it's just gonna get louder. But where this gets more interesting is when we use our voice stack spread, and we can kind of put that on a variety of parameters. So it's kind of like a modulation source. Can do a lot for your stereo field, can kind of do a lot for detuning, especially on these guys here. So on this pulse width, we'll do an example of it. We're gonna turn on our stereo detune. I'm gonna leave it on 0 actually, and then I'm gonna use our voice stack spread and we're gonna listen to what happens. We can also put it onto our pitch offset. And then one of the other things that I think is new to this update, I could be wrong, is that we have these different options to our modulation, like destinations and how it's going to impact the sound. So let's try exponential on this one and logarithmic on this one. And whenever you start doing voice stacking and spreading of stuff, it's important to kind of play around with the retrigger so you can hear the difference in sound. And then we also have our sub and we have our sync. And I would just recommend that you experiment and you play with this on or off. It makes a very big difference depending on what oscillator type you're using and what you're doing down here in the subsection. So you can hear how that totally kills the sound. So that's really dependent on what's going on with what you're making. So I don't want to make any universal claims about that. Just be aware that that is something you can use. If you want to turn off the sub entirely, you just bring this down to 0%. So with Bitwig in the sound generator section, these work off of a percentage where if I go noise 100%, the signal's not going to be louder. We're just going to get a bunch of noise. Similar concept there with the sub section, okay? And what this is telling you is that the noise is coming at the end. So if I set noise to 100%, it's going to cancel out the sub. All right, so that's what we have going on there. And I actually don't think there's too much else to discuss apart from getting into some of the new sections of this instrument, specifically what we have down in here with our wavetable oscillator. So for those of you guys that are not familiar, and hopefully we'll see if everything's good to go, let's bring our voice stacking back off and let's bring our voices back up to the maximum. Turn the volume up a little bit more. One of the oscillator types that I don't think we've covered on this channel is the swarm, all right, which is an interesting one. Let's turn this all the way off. And you can hear that it's either going to make a swarm of like sawtooths or a swarm of sines. With the sines, it's just going to do a lot of beating. And again, this would definitely be a fun one to play around with voice stacking. I kind of just enjoy this one for like otherworldly type sounds. Hear that beating gets influenced. How those guys are overlapping. And I need to stop because I just have too much fun, but and what I love about this is I haven't even used the filter and I've already got some like really crazy sound to come out of this thing, but that's besides the point. That's me getting distracted as I always tend to do. We have not looked at the swarm before, but that is pretty much what it does. I think it's self-explanatory. Where we get into more interesting options or some new timbral possibilities is when we go into the wavetable oscillator. So this is new. And the wavetable oscillator, what I'd recommend you do first and foremost is just go in and probably look at the help on this thing. And you can go in, I believe, and we can just get to look at the wavetable section, and there you go. And so if you're ever concerned or you're curious about something, just go in, click into the help, and you can see the different options that you have in the instrument here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just look at this guy and just talk about it a little bit. So with wavetable synthesis, you'll see a lot of people say that they love using wavetables, but they really don't. What they've done is they've used something like Serum and they found an interesting wave shape. They've loaded that wave shape in, and then they're still just doing their low pass filtering, their other envelopes like you would normally do in a traditional synthesizer. Wavetable synthesis really is the process of indexing or moving through the wavetable. Okay, so here you can see that we're starting with standard 4. We start with a sine wave, and we got to turn our sub off. And we're going to go through into a triangle, into more of a pulse, and then into a square wave. Now, if we go in and we click on this disable interpolation, it's just going to jump, which can also be really interesting. So I believe, I don't know exactly how many indexes you can have. Maybe it's 256. I don't really know. It doesn't matter. But this is kind of valuable and interesting for sound design if you are then taking this and modulating it with something. That's what wavetable synthesis is all about. So before you get into the filter, you're already getting some kind of timbral shift to occur via the wavetable that you have. And inside of Bitwig, we have a number of wavetables we can use. And maybe we'll just try to go in here and find something crazy. I don't know if they'll have something just called crazy, but that's like what I want. So let's see what we got here. Let's use this. There's growl chorus. That sounds interesting. We'll click on growl chorus. We can hear the various wavetables that we're going through. And then we can listen to what these different modes do, phase distribution. I don't hear that much of a difference, but my assumption is if you're doing some really crazy stuff, you're going to. Okay, it might be more obvious if we use the retrigger. Okay, now we're starting to hear some stuff, I think mainly because our voice stacking is on there. But you could imagine then if we use the voice stack spread and we changed it onto like just the index, the starting index position, and then move things around, you're gonna get some nice variation. Let's try that. Yep, you can see how they then spread out on that table and are then moving through. And I'm just curious to hear some of these differences, just to give you guys also a feel for it. Interesting. And this is actually more related to when I'm re-triggering notes, but just for the sake of it, I turned that on and off. See how aggressive it is when that's on. So that seems to be the real fat one there. So then we can also go in and we have these unison settings. This is very similar to something like Serum. And we have a few different options. So let's just go ahead and go crazy. Let's kick it right to 16. So for a sound like this, that's really digital in nature, complex might be the most kind of in-your-face aggressive. There's also a spread unison phases. Actually, don't think I like it in this case. And again, you're going to put an LFO or something onto this. Like a random. Then let's see what happens if we add in a little phase modulation. Woo, hello. Imagine throwing a distortion on here. Let's bring in a little sub. See what happens if I hit sync. Oh man, it ruined it. So let's take our ADSR and let's actually route that to the index, and then we'll change our ADSR envelope. Whoa. And there you go. And then the other thing that we have added in is a variety of filter options. So some of these are kind of like new to me, having not really worked with the grid too much, but you can see we have all sorts of stuff. We have ladder filters, Sallen key filters. That's more like, if memory serves correct, that's like kind of cheap synthesizers, like on like some of the Korgs and things. I'm sure it sounds good. That's the one they give us by default. The SVF, the XP, which might be based more on the Oberheim. I'm not sure. See, it might be actually what we're used to having from the past. Let's go in here and use this one. And then we can set our cutoff modulation amount. Oh yeah, that's fun. That to keep moving. And we can drive into that a little bit too. could add an LFO to just also continue to move the index, or we can randomize it. Let's use a random. Let's see what we got going on. And again, this is with no effects on here, so that's fun. Let's hear what it sounds like in a higher register. And then what we could also do is go and just set the mod wheel to set what's happening with the filter. And this would be kind of like a patch done and created here inside of the Polymer. Just give that a little variety if we want. So, see it? Maybe play with another filter design. Amazing sometimes how different a sound can be just depending on the filter type you choose. So strongly recommend. Whoa, that's interesting. I was not expecting that at all. Now we gotta kick up that volume. That ladder filter really kills it on this sound. That's what's so interesting about this. How different it can be. Needs more release. And I'm maxing out that CPU. So there you go. That is an example of working with the Polymer. And I'd recommend that for everybody else. You just kind of go in here and you experiment on your own to find, you know, these really interesting sort of timbres you can get just by playing with the index. And as you see, combining some of those other things that we've looked at here in this video. So, next part of this video, I think we're just going to maybe listen to a few presets, see what we think about them. This may end up shocking some people, but in my opinion, a synthesizer is really only as good as its presets. That's the first impression people usually get. The first thing is not to program. Typically, it's to jump through the patches and hear what it sounds like. So that's what we're going to do here with the Polymer, not really trying to compare it to anything else, but just get a sense for the sound of this beast. And we go in here to our presets. Remember that you choose your instrument over here. You have categories, you have tags, creator, if you kind of know whose sounds you want to listen to. With the Phase 4, I found that the creator is actually very, very useful. There's a couple people that make really good sounds, at least that are relevant to me. But with this one, let's just go ahead and let's use the analog tag first, and we're going to listen to a few of these guys. And that one's using the sawtooth oscillator. This one's using the pulse. See what effect they put in there, just a delay. We have acid phase. Could throw an arpeggiator on that. And so far, I don't think we've seen the wavetable used. So let's go down. Let's try a couple other things. Here's one with the wavetable. Okay, let's try a couple more. Let's try fat bottom bass. Looks like it's got some kind of a key tracking thing set up. It's actually random by each keystroke. Interesting. Maybe. I guess it won't open for me. Let's try this one. Let's try a couple more. Definitely a lot of variety, which I think is what they were going for with this instrument. And we'll just grab a couple more. Obviously, you guys can check the rest of these out. Don't really like this one very much. I take it back, I do like it. Very nice. And we'll choose the very last one. Actually, no, we're not going to use a West Coast bongo. Go higher octave. Let's try this velvet pad. I don't want to end on one I don't like. There's some stuff happening with velocity on this. Cool, I like that one. Let's see what they got going on with this. So velocity is affecting the cutoff, okay? And this is usually the way that I kind of learn a patch really quickly, is just to see what's happening in this modulation matrix. So you can see they use the stack voice sort of technique that we looked at and talked about before. So now let's go in and let's listen to the digital ones. My guess is that these digital ones, they're gonna be more so what's going on with your, oh, not in this case, this is the phase, but I'll expect to see more wavetables. Reverb sounded nice on that one. That's pretty nice. That's what you expect from a wavetable. That's not bad. Cool. Let's listen to a few more. Let's see how many effects are on this. Just a couple. A lot of times when I'm going through and listening to presets, this is very important. Oh boy, hyperaught. It's kind of important that you listen through to, oh, okay. Let's see if we have control over the speed of that. Doesn't look like it. Oh, there we go. Dummy. Interesting. Okay, I'll try a couple more. like this one a lot. That's pretty cool. We'll pick a couple more. And this is more like something that you could accomplish in some of the other instruments. Humanoid. Oh yeah. Every instrument has a glass pad somewhere. Oh yeah. This reminds me of Arturia pigments. This is the kind of sound I associate with that instrument. And you might think that what we're doing right now is like a little bit of a waste of time, and it kind of is. I mean, it's something that you should probably be doing on your own, but this is the way, anyone's ever curious, like how I'm judging a synthesizer. Because I almost always start with a preset. PPG bells. Pretty good. Ah, nice. That's so cool. It's like a delay on the movement. I'm very thankful that I found this one. This is a really nice sound. A lot of LFOs. Very cool, very interesting. Okay. I think that's probably good for the presets for now. We ended on one that I really like, so that's probably where we do want to end. In the final section of the video, we are just going to talk now a little bit about this instrument and maybe how useful it might be for you in your productions. I think that Polymer is Bitwig Studio at its finest. It's giving you tons of options while at the same time keeping it simple and making it fun for you to work with. I think of like all Wavetable synths I've used. This one seems like so much fun. It's so easy. It's intuitive of the stuff that you can modulate. There's a lot of options, but there's not too many options, right? You have now more filter options than you've had before, a simple envelope, but you can always expand it out and take it further. You can always pull this out to the grid. And potentially from the grid, you could add in more sound sources if you want to do that and if you know what you're doing with the wiring. Personally, is that something that I would do? Probably not, and that's just because it's going to take me out of the flow. For a lot of people, I think working in the grid is a lot of fun. Not so much fun for me. And that kind of comes back to this whole, well, how much are you going to use it as a music producer? If you're a new music producer, this is amazing. I mean, I think that Bitwig Studio recently, with a lot of the presets and things they've added, has become like a really great tool for new producers. Where at the beginning, I wouldn't say that as much because it had very much a limited palette, and it kind of was screaming for you to go and use your plugins and say, okay, well, instead of using the polysynth here, like I'm going to put Diva in here. Instead of using the FM4 or whatever it's called, I'm going to use like FM8 from Native Instruments or whatever the case may be. And the last update that Bitwig Studio did, the last feature that they added or instrument that they added that I think really kind of was like, whoa, eye-opener for me, was the Phase 4, because in my opinion, phase modulation, frequency modulation synthesis has never been more fun and easy and straightforward and intuitive than it is with the Phase 4 and editing presets to kind of change the timbre. With this instrument, I still think that probably I'm going to pull to Serum more often because I'm, number one, a little bit more familiar with that. But also number two, I've just been using it for so long. And that's always the danger with these things. That's always the danger, I think, with the development team saying, well, do we want to make a synthesizer like this? Because probably most people are already using that. But I'm happy that they put this thing in here. And I really want to try to use it and force myself to go to it instead because I think it's more fun to edit. I'd probably be more likely to go in here and modify presets than I would be to do that with something like Serum because it's all right there in front of you. And it's very easy to work with, easy to see, easy to find those modulation sources and things of that nature. Sound quality wise, I think it's very good. I mean, obviously it's not trying to replicate or replace, a vintage analog synthesizer. It's not trying to replace a Jupiter or anything like that. And nor should it. That's not kind of the point. When you're going for that true analog sound and you're working with Bitwig Studio, you kind of have to go to the analog waves thing. And that's still one of those packs that I hope that they continue to add to. The final thing I'll just mention to people, in case you're not aware, is that when you are going into presets, there is the option to kind of select by the tag here. So if I go in here and I choose all devices inside of Bitwig, I can see everything that's been added in version 3.3 or in version 3.2 or just in version 3.x, whatever that means. And then you can go in here and you can see, okay, well, they've added lots of stuff to the polygrid. They've added some instrument layers stuff. And I think it's important that you go in here and kind of look at this, that you don't just miss these updates. You don't miss these features coming to Bitwig when they do, because I think as the program has come along, the sounds that have come along with it have also gotten a lot better than it was at the beginning. There's a lot of stuff that's now, in my opinion, like more usable, if you will, that's going to be fine in relation to, some of the stuff that you might be hearing on the radio or on Beatport or on YouTube or wherever you listen to your music, I guess, is the point that I'm getting to. So all in all, I think Polymer is amazing. I think it would be great maybe in the future if there's like a Polymer XL, and I think there's like the kilohertz bundle has the ability to kind of make a synthesizer by like pulling modules and snapping them into place. I think for a lot of Bitwig users, having that ability, having that freedom and flexibility to say, okay, well, I want a wavetable, but I also want to use a swarm, or I also want to sign in addition to the sub and stuff. That would be very useful. I don't think that you need two filters. I really just think having an extra oscillator here would kind of take things potentially to another level. But I appreciate what they did here. Sometimes less is more. And as you could hear from those presets, it wasn't screaming for another oscillator. Most of those presets sounded really good just as they were. And I think it encourages you to experiment with filter designs and to hear how those filters are changing the sound, which is often something as music producers we overlook. We just throw the first, Moog style filter on there and say, okay, we're good to go. But I think that's enough rambling and ranting in this video. Hope this has been useful for you guys, and I definitely recommend checking out the presets and seeing if you can make a track with them and see how it compares to, the tracks that maybe you're used to making with Serum, for example. Alrighty, take care, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.